Hi weaving friends, I've been working at this summer and winter sampler for a little while and I've decided that I want to change my set, and to change my set while I still have the same warp on, it's totally doable. You just need to move everything and do some recalculating. I already started to actually cut this off the loom, and then it occurred to me that this might be helpful to somebody else. So I'm going to show you a little bit of the process of what I'm doing. I have a 10-dent reed and I have set this piece at 20 ends per inch. Now with summer and winter, it's looking fine, but I want to see if I can get a more even coverage of the weft, as in less of the warp showing, and I just want to see if I can do that by opening up the set just a little bit. Okay, so I started off by totally loosening off the tension. I also need to cut off my floating selvage there, and I'm going to just start by cutting the warp in bunches. Just make sure that you have that tension eased off enough that you don't lose your warp wanting to go back through because it's too tensioned from behind. So I'm just grabbing little bunches. I'm holding onto them here so that I don't lose them at all, because I definitely don't want that after I've done all the work of threading and so on. And I'm just tying them in slip knots to keep them secure. Now when you're changing set in mid-project, you're probably going to want, unless it's a simple even number that you're changing to, you're probably going to want to use a reed substitution chart. So as I said, I'm weaving at 20 ends per inch at the moment, but I want to weave at about 17 and give that a go and just see how it looks. And so 17 is not going to fit equally into my 10-dent reed. So I need to consult a reed substitution chart. There are plenty of them online, and it will tell you exactly how many ends you should be putting in each dent in your reed to obtain your desired set. So for me, to get 17, it's going to be 1, 2, 2. So that means that at the moment, to get my set of 20 in my 10 dents, I have 2 ends in every single dent, but I'm going to change that to space it just a little to get that set of 17 ends per inch instead, and it's going to be at a rate of 1 thread, then 2, then 2, then 1 thread, then 2, then 2. So it's not hugely dramatic, it's just a little change to give it a little bit more space. So now that I'm at this point, I can start spacing them out the way that I want to. Now what you'll want to do as well before you start respacing is you'll want to know, well, how do I know where to space it to? So you're going to have to recalculate your width in the reed according to the set that you're using. And I've already done that ahead of time, so I know that I only need to move a couple of spaces on. So I'm just taking the first bunch, and I'm going to make that 1. I'm just moving it a few spaces. And then I need to move one of these threads from this slot. And make sure that you are keeping your threads in order according to your threading as well. Otherwise you can have problems with crossed threads. Okay, so I'm checking at the heddles here that none of them are crossing. So there's 2, and then I need 2 for the next one. Okay, so that little bunch there is threaded 1, and then 2, and then 2. So now I go back to the start, and I'm selecting 1 thread, making sure I don't have any crossing between my threads. 1, and then 2, and then 2. Back to 1. Now I need to separate these out and make sure I've got the right thread. So 1, 2. And then the next 2. I haven't left myself a lot of length here in the warp threads in the front of the reed. You probably want to leave a little bit more. I was just a bit concerned because I don't have a lot of warp left, so I'm being a little bit conservative. 1 and 2 and 2. And so I'm just going to carry on doing that, making sure that I don't miss any of the spaces. And actually, considering I'm going to be tying on, because I need to take this other part of weaving off the apron rod, but considering I'm going to be tying on, I can actually let off a little more tension there so that I can have a bit more thread length, make it more comfortable to thread. So I'm just going to continue going across the reed like that. My knots are all done, and I've also rejigged my heddles a little bit, the threads and the heddles, just even them out, move them across. So before, when I had my set of 20, I had around 10, just over 10 inches width in the reed, and now I've got about 12.5. So that was what I was saying about having to remeasure to move things. Now the next thing that I need to do is just take off my warp that I already have on here. So I'm just going to pull that off, and then whatever your preference is here, probably depending on your level of patience, you can either untie your knots or you can cut them. I'm cutting my floating selvages, but I do tend to actually undo the knots rather than cut them. And that's not because I always want fringe necessarily, it's because if you cut them, then you're going to have all these little bits of threads to pick up later on. They'll fall to the floor or whatever. So I think even though it takes a little minute longer to undo the knots, if you've done surgeon's knots, it's pretty easy to undo them. As you can see, I'm just undoing them with one hand while I'm holding the apron rod with the other. And then I don't have all those little bits to pick up afterwards. It's one of the things that I don't particularly like doing. All right, so I'm going to set that one aside. This is going to be wet finished. It's an important part of my process of seeing how things work out after wet finishing. So then I need to bring my apron rod back over the cloth beam. Don't forget to do that or you'll be sorry. And putting my brake back on, and then I've got a little friction brake at the side here, so I'm putting that back in place. All done. And now I'm ready to tie back on. I think I'm going to need a little bit of extra length there again. As I said, I don't have that much warp left over, but I did really want to try this. And you know, some people might say, oh, well, that's a bit of a pain to spend the time rethreading the reed. But my way of thinking about it is, well, if I can do that on the same warp and get, you know, it's like a double experiment then, because if I didn't really like the set that I was weaving at, rather than rethreading, making another warp using all that yarn for a whole nother sample, just use the end of what you already have and just take that little bit of time, because it really doesn't take that long to rethread it, and it's not like really difficult to recalculate or anything either, because you've already got all these numbers in your head. You know how many ends you've got. It's all sort of fresh in your mind because you've just done that warp, and really all you're doing is tweaking. And so that's about it, friends. That's all I really need to show you of how to reslay your reed for a different set. I'm going to start weaving on this again. I have enough warp left that I'll know by the time I finish this warp whether I think it's a better set or not. And sometimes you might not know until you actually finish and get the piece off the loom. But when I'm finished this, I will have 2 pieces of cloth to compare. I'll have this one at 20 ends per inch. I'll have this one at 17 ends per inch. Then I can make further decisions from there. I might decide that I need to tweak the set even more, or I might decide that I really like one or the other, but at least I'll know. So I hope that was helpful to you folks, and until next time, happy weaving.